Better side
Without further ado,
Okay, we're going to talk about taverns today, and I'm going to tell you how they got through the 1830s. Alcohol. They drank a lot of alcohol. Here is, in 1776, each American drank 3.5 gallons pure 200 proof alcohol. In 1830, 4 gallons, exclusive of ale, hard cider, and wine. Ezra Holland Street, Sandusky Countyans gathered early one morning with a keg of whiskey and raised the courthouse. Lawyers drank before court. Physicians used it as security on themselves. July 4th, 1839, there was an absence pledge in this town. A man named Williams ran a tavern at the Harrington Place, and they had 12,000 bushels of corn annually. And up on the east side of town, where it used to be a laundromat and a shoe store, the building's been torn down. It's called the Pig Barn. And the men would go there and drink, and then they'd throw all their waste on the ground. It would go through the cracks. The pigs would eat it. And when you came home, your wife had said, "You've been drinking again because you smell like a pig." So it's a big deal. In 1909, now in 1910, we had a chance to get Bowling Green State University to come here. But because we had 25 saloons, 9 restaurants, 12 churches, and 8 ice cream places, and 9 piano stores, they decided not to come here.
What year was that?
1910 is Bowling Green. This was 1909. We had 25 saloons. So coming here, when you first start getting people coming, it's about 1806. Slaves were brought to Fremont in 1780 out at Negro Point. At that point, we had a couple French people lived here first. English come later. About 1820, after the War of 1812, we had about 20 families here. It's not a great place to live, and that's why there were so many taverns here. Because that got people through the fevers, the hot and the cold sweats. Passenger pigeons were so thick you could stand and hit them with a bat and knock them out of the sky. Trees stretched all the way from New England to Illinois. So if you were a squirrel, you'd never have to touch the ground until you got to Illinois. We had trees 200 feet high here. In Gibsonburg, trees, the first branch would be 120 feet high. They brought in French Canadians to chop the trees down. The trees were then shipped up to a place called Oak Harbor. That's where they got their name from. So this was a very inhospitable place to live back in the day. And before I get started, 2 weeks from Saturday, I will be starting the round table at Spiegel Grove in my 14th year. It's all on revolutionary topics. If you're interested, I have a little ticket you can look at to see what's on, and come if you can. So here we go with taverns. One of the first taverns they talk about. Now, first of all, somebody asked me one time, how did they measure? I want to talk about mile markers. There's about 31 mile markers. 23 of them are still original. It's the longest continuous line of mile markers in the United States. It starts at the river. The first one you'll see is on Franklin. So how many times have you passed Franklin and never seen that mile marker? It's there. Benchmark is the second one. Then you go out by the underpass, that's number 3. They are almost exactly a mile apart. And how did they do that? Well, they did it in a couple ways. Down there in the bottom right-hand corner, that was what Ben Franklin invented in 1745 for the Postal Service. You put that little gizmo on your carriage wheel, and it would click off a mile. Now, we didn't use that here. What we probably used was lengths of steel. As it says here, in 1806, Congress authorized the National Road Request. Field measurements included surveyor ground-based measuring tools, such as a surveyor's chain or tape, 50-foot chains linked together. Now, they measured those markers before the road was even built. But sometime, hopefully when you've got a passenger in your car, have them check when you're heading to Perrysburg on the right-hand side, every mile is a marker. And about 5 years ago, a kid, for his Eagle project, cleaned them all up. So they're pretty nice now. What it will say on Franklin, it says P29. It means it's 29 miles from that point to Perrysburg. So they have a little marker. It might say LS at the bottom because they've been Lower Sandusky. That's what we were before Fremont. Earliest taverns, you can see, boy, you got a tasty meal. You had fat coons, wild turkeys, and half saddles of deer before the glowing fire of the common room in the presence of the guests. 25 cents a day, dinner for a man and his horse being 6 1/4 cents. Now there are descriptions from pioneers who went to the Howard Tavern. And when people stayed overnight, you had to watch where you walk because everybody is laying on the floor. The stink was unbelievable. These people hadn't had baths in weeks. They're going on one of the worst, called the worst road in America at this time, Route 20. So they're full of mud. They've been fighting all day, maybe to get a mile, because that's why there's a tavern every mile, because you had to stop and rest. So they'd all lay down, and the second floor at the Howard Tavern was the same thing. The lice was so thick you could actually see it jump off of people's bodies. It stunk. You paid for space on the floor. That's it. Now, you may think I'm kidding, but you can read in the Civil War where there's a jacket laying on the ground, and it starts to move because there's so much lice on it. That's what these people were dealing with. So thank goodness we take showers now. First frame building, of course, was a tavern, and I'll show it to you. I have a picture of here. 104 South Front, which is now the parking lot for the bank. Door's Shoe Store was also there. This is about 1830. This information comes from Lucy Keeler. So Lucy Keeler was the cousin of the Hayes, and she was a local historian of the time. So if you're going to believe Lucy, that's where the first tavern was. And Israel Harrington's a big deal in Elmore, Ohio. When you go to Elmore, they'll talk about Israel Harrington a lot. It was erected in 1815, which causes a little bit of problem with the next story. So it was right here, the Harrington Tavern. I think it'll be called the Ogle Tavern at one point, and then it'll move up to where the Garrison is today, because J.P. Moore was a carriage worker. So it kind of moves around, but it was right here. And here's the story. Now, you heard me say it was 1850, but in Lucy Keeler's own words, she says that Colonel Johnson came back from the Battle of the Thames, where he got credit for killing Tecumseh. And as on his way back from Canada, he stopped at this bar and had a drink. Now, was it built at this point? I've seen records that say the Harrington Tavern was built in 1811, 1812, which would put it in that time period. So it's very possible. Now, who's Richard Johnson? When you look at Tecumseh, they don't know really who shot him, but he gets the most credit. He becomes Vice President of the United States under Martin Van Buren. He's from Kentucky, so he's bringing his Kentucky riflemen back through here. And he also was, I don't know if they were married, but he was living with a black woman in the 1830s. So you want to talk scandal, Johnson's your man. So here's the Ogle Tavern, and you can see here, it was on the north of State Street. It was moved to the northeast corner of Front and Croghan, which Croghan and everything is measured north of Croghan. It's not State Street. So when you cross Croghan, now you're north. When you cross Croghan coming this way, now you're south. So that's kind of hard to figure, but that's the way it was. Thomas Ogle and then a guy named Isaac Knapp made it into a tavern. Why? Because that's what people wanted back in the day. We're going back to 1854. You can see here Thomas Hawkins, who is a legend in his own time in the early parts of this town. In 1822, he played male and female parts in theater. He was a town character, and he also gave a guy named Ralph Buckland $50 to put a sign out when he became a lawyer. So Hawkins is kind of an original settler of this area. So there's the carriage on the left and the Garrison restaurant on the right. And J.P. Moore also had a tavern out on Route 50, or Route 20, and I'll show you where that was in a minute. And he was one of the guys that didn't screw people over. Some of these guys that owned tracts of land on 20 were unscrupulous. For instance, you get stuck. You'd have to hire his oxen. The oxen would pull you out, get you unstuck. Sometimes you were at the same place for 3 days because at night he'd go out and water down around his area. And one guy spent $100 and he didn't move from that tavern for 3 days. I believe his name was Andy. If you go to Oakwood, you know that's J.P. Moore because that's the carriage. That's on the top of his grave. That's a grave marker. Kind of unique. A lot of the early founders are buried in Oakwood. Some of them, of course, in the old Whittlesey Cemetery, which predates Oakwood Cemetery. But this comes from Oakwood Cemetery. Now, the corner that you're looking at is where Sardis Berkshire put his first business. He made $50,000 a year in 1831. So at the age of 29, he retired. Now, if you look at old-time pictures of Fremont, houses went all the way back to the river, and his business was right on the river. So it's one of the largest businesses in this vicinity, and there's a guy named Grant. We have a Grant Street. It might be after Ulysses, or it might be named after David Grant, because there was a panic of 1837, and David Grant saved Burchard's business, and the house at 1002 Burchard, which is the old Stetzel house, was built for Burchard for the Grant women, because he said he would take care of the family after David died at the age of, like, I think 31. He died in 1841. So he took care of the Grants, and the granddaughter lived until 1834. She was 90. The mother was a Dickinson, and she lived also to be in her 90s too. So that Stetzel house was originally built by Sardis Berkshire. Next to the house, it's the garage light. That's the stable for the horse for Hayes too. It's still there. Berkshire would rather trade with the Indians than the whites, because the Indians believed that in order to go to their heaven, they had to pay their debts. So they would come to his building, pay off their debts. He never sold them alcohol, and he allowed them to sleep on the floor. And I don't know if you know about the story of Seneca John. Seneca John's grave is out on Route 19. Seneca John was going to be executed by members of his own tribe because they were jealous, make a long story short. And Seneca John came in to pay off his debts, and he told Sardis, the next day I will be executed. And Sardis tried to intervene, and they said, none of your business, Sardis, and they executed him. Andrew's Tavern, this was at the foot of Garrison. We had them everywhere. Third story is the first Masonic lodge in this town. The building was built by Nicholas Whittinger, and the only two listed in the town worth $1,000 in 1820. People used to live in the hills down at Arch Street. You know where the Arch Street dead ends? And they lived like inside the hills there in the 1820s. So we're not talking about great accommodation. This is the Ohio Mansion House, became the Kessler House, also the Wheeling Station. I'll have a picture of it. The upper floor was a theater in 1822, and you can imagine Thomas is dressed as a man and a woman. He's playing both parts. They loved him. And that's also where the first Catholic church service was held, in that particular building. $250 per week, that's a lot of money. So the Kessler House would have been here. Dr. Beaugrand, who was a doctor who had a house over by the where the former Social Security building used to be, and now it's some kind of mental health group or something there. His house was there. It floated away during the flood in 1914. This is where he had his offices. As far as being a doctor, he lived to be about 6 months shy of 100 years old. And this is where the Kessler House and the Ohio Mansion House were located. So there is the Wheeling Lake Erie Depot, and again, the Kessler House would have been located there, the Mansion House. You'll also find a picture of the Grant funeral. When David Grant died, there's a picture of all the people coming to that particular service. This is the Northern Exchange. This was north of the Mansion House, so we're going up Front Street now. We'd be across State Street on the right-hand side. And you can see here that in that area they put this big clock in this, and they'd ring the bell, and that meant people could come in for lunch. Now where they went, I don't know, probably the mansion house, but small town, people heard the bell, they knew it was time to take a break. You couldn't cross the street in this area unless you were carrying guns because the wolves were so prevalent. A man from Scotland moved here and he said, well, I can have sheep. So on Bidwell, he built a 14-foot high fence, brought in 26 sheep. The next day, they were all killed by wolves. Wolves or sheep was not a good idea. Indians didn't kill them because their pelts weren't worth anything. Western Hotel is located on the old Buckland block, which would be down on Front Street where the Huntington Bank is. So it faced State Street. It was about 1834, and when we had the cholera epidemic, Sardis got sick, a couple other mainstays got sick, and a man named Thomas Vincent Curtis, is a black man, nursed them back to health. Now Sardis had all the prejudices of a person towards black people, but every time he saw Thomas Vincent, he tipped his hat because he believed he saved his life. So that's where the Western Hotel would have been located, right on the corner of State and Front. And Buckland had a law office there, and during one of the celebrations, I think for a governor was elected, they shot off a cannon, and the cannon backed into the building and tore up his office pretty good. A lot of cannon stories that didn't end well. Here's the Hotel Fremont, and I'm sure some of you remember that. I think it burned down in '81.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's kind of what I remember. Originally known as the Croghan House, built by an Englishman named Weiler, who lived in the big brick house on Crogansville Hill. If you're ever over on the other side, we had two sides of this town. One was Crogansville, which is across the river, and the other was Lower Sandusky. The Sandusky River was called the neutral ground, so when the different Indian factions would come, they would go to the river, and there wouldn't be any consequences of that. That's where that was a safe place. And back then, I don't know if you knew this or not, they just threw the corn in the river, and the corn popped up along the riverbank. And fish was incredible. Fish would actually jump in your boat. This is still here. This is the Macklin House. This is one of the original taverns. The pike started at the river, and not too far from the river across. This is across basically from Grace Lutheran Church. And on the other side of the street is the old Rawson House, which is still there. Both of them were built in 1837, along with Brainerd's house, which is where the Croghan Colonial Bank. We had 3 brick homes built in 1837. Macklin House is one, and across the street is Rawson, who owned all that land all the way out to Walmart. It's called Elm Street at that point. There's your tavern. It's a mile from the river. It's right across from Franklin Street. So when you're sitting at the stoplight, that's what you're looking at. If you're on Franklin looking south, that's original tavern. These things are built around 1830s, 1834 in that area. And the reason they were there is because sometimes it would take a day to get up State Street Hill because it was much steeper than what it is now. And there's so much mud, it's just hard to believe. Lindsay took you 4 days in some cases to get from here to Lindsay. So this is the east side. I love this story because the Colonial Hotel, which is by where Whitey's is today, went by a bunch of names. Harpster's Tavern, William Tell, and the Eagle. And then later on, Ruby, there was a house of prostitution on Wabash Avenue. The house is still there. And every gentleman I talk to that remembers it has never been there, of course. But they can tell me that, oh, I remember Ruby's. Did you ever go home? No. But I can tell you that when we went by the Colonial House, if the light was on in the upper story and it was green, Ruby's open for business. Oh, but of course you never went. Oh, no. So I haven't talked to anybody that's ever been there. And my excuse is I wasn't living here at the time. But the house is still there. He also had the Goose House. And you can see down here, this is where I got the information, pages 17, 18 from Lucy Keeler, who's talking about, she was a great historian as far as the early part of the history of this town. So there it is, and I can see the green light up there. See it? I'm kidding. I can't see it. But, located right where Whitey's was. It's called the William Tell Hotel, Harkster's Tavern, all these different names. And that's the Goose House. I originally thought I knew where it was. Now I'm not so sure. I first thought it was in this area, but now I think it might have been more up towards the street, going up towards the hill. It's really hard to figure out, so this is my best guess. It's on this side. I know it's on that side of the road. I just don't know if it was right there. Doesn't really matter because everybody loves a good goose, right? I can say that. So 1808, they're going to start thinking about, let's get through this swamp. Now Joseph Badger, and we need to put a plaque for this guy because part of the reason this settlement survived is because of him. He's a pastor. He was banished here because he did something, got in trouble. So they sent him out here to the middle of nowhere. So in 1806, he's riding out here, and there is nothing here but woods. And every time I tell the story, the courthouse used to be 2 blocks from where it was moved. It was on Burchard and Park on the corner, and they moved it across from the library because people couldn't get to it. It was too far out in the boondocks. So that's why it was moved in 1828, and it's still there. It's a rental now. And if you get a chance to go in there in the basement, you can see the hand-hewn logs. They're huge, and you can see the marks from the actual axe that made those beams. So they're going to cut through this swamp, and you can see how long the swamp is. And Fremont is at the lower edge, Lower Sandusky. So when they talk about Lower Sandusky, they said, be careful about Lower Sanduskyans because they're going to cheat you. Because the last place to buy anything before you head in the swamp is here. So they're selling old nags for 20 bucks that aren't probably going to make it through. So it's kind of unscrupulous, plus it's full of disease. And not just here, but the Black Swamp is full of it. And if you look up there, you can see on the outer edges, you've got Finley, Defiance, everything's on the outer edge except for Bowling Green. The only one that's in the middle is Bowling Green, and they used to make fun of people from BG because they smelled like wood smoke, because they had these smudge pots going constantly, because the flies are atrocious. So this is the chronology of it. You get a strip of land 120 feet wide from Lower Sandusky to Perrysburg. They surveyed it. There's 120 foot tall trees. And then Congress authorized the work, which is amazing. Congress did anything. Oh, sorry. I flipped to now. Congress authorized the work. Trees are felled. There's a drainage ditch. The cart and the horses present an almost indistinguishable mass of slow-moving mud. Literally, if you got off this main drag, you would sink up to your neck. That's how bad it was. And if you sat in Hessville, they said the line of people going across from Hessville, heading out west, was just continuous. Hessville. So you got 31 taverns. They divide up rights, even selling rights to mud holes. So the acreage along the pike went way back. It was narrow because all the people wanted was that frontage on the pike, because you could charge people to stay at the house. So when you look at the old plot lines, they go straight back for a long way, but the most important thing was that you had a site on Route 20 so you could charge traffic. So in 1838, improvements were made, whatever that means. Now we found a good road, a high turnpike paved with broken stone, so we had to pay an 8-cent toll. This comes from a journal entry, and that's where the term turnpike comes from, because you would pay the toll, and they would turn the pike. This log that went across the road, turnpike. Now they take pictures of it from above. We're really gonna fight this railroad. So So what gets it going too is we were going to fight with Michigan and Ohio and a guy named Robert Lucas, Lucas County. He said, man, we can't fight, we can't even get there. It's so muddy, we need to do something. So that's when you get the military involved, that's when they decide we need to build a way to get through this black swamp. This area is the last area to be settled. Land was $1.25 an acre. So it's cheap, but it's also not easy to live here. So this is Lucas, and he says, we proceeded to the foot of the rapids. The swamp was without intermission from knee deep to belly deep on our to our horses for 8 or 10 miles together. And that's coming from Lucas as he's trying to get to the battle. I traveled 25 miles, a very rainy day, and encamped in what is called the Black Swamp. Had a disagreeable night of wet and mosquitoes. Mosquitoes were unbearable. Going through here in the winter, if it wasn't frozen, you'd be walking through this muck and the ice would cut you up. If you want to see what it looked like, go down to Lady of the Pines along Cemetery Road. It's constantly wet there all year round. That's what the Black Swamp looked like. And if you want to really see it, go out to Archbold to Gall's Woods, and that's been preserved from the Black Swamp time period. Some of those trees have never been cut. Gall's Woods and Archbold. They got pathways and stuff, so you don't have to go through them all. So Congress authorized in 1823, they're going to have toll booths every 8 to 10 miles. One was at Woodville, and if you get really interested and you want to see, you go to the Woodville Library, they have the original toll booth record of all the things that went through. And the guy was meticulous. He wrote down carts, the size of the cart, pigs, everything that went through there, he kept meticulous record of it. Martin Van Buren Shook, I'm sure it must have something to do with the president, and Fanny Shock Newcomer worked on the toll gate, and Ohio paid $40,000 to pave it with stone. Now, I've talked to several people who used to work on Route 20, and they said you get 40 feet down, you'll still find the logs perfectly preserved from that because it's so thick. Also, when you get to Bowling Green where they use corduroy logs on Route 25, same thing. Deep enough, those things are preserved. If you've ever been on a corduroy road, you know it's going to shake up your intestines. They're not fun. Keep track of your location. Exactly a mile apart. Not sure how they did it. Like I said, they did have this little wheel that they could go up and down. I've never been able to find out how they actually measured it. Did they use the chain? I can't imagine they were able to walk through that swamp. So to me, it'd be like a chain or something. But Franklin's odometer on the carriage was very accurate, and that goes back to 1745, so that's kind of amazing. But that was not used here. And you can see it's the only continuous string of mile markers existing in the country. So if you do go look for the markers, go with a friend.
Are they all there?
They're all there. 23 of them, I believe, are original, and some of them have been replaced with concrete. I think originally they were limestone. So this would be the second one. This picture was taken in 2018. It's still there. You'll notice it says LS at the top, and it'll give you the mile, like 2 miles back. In Perrysburg, it'll say 28 or 29. So that's what it means. And each one of them has that mark, and they're really nice now since that kid did it for an Eagles project. Father Machabu came here, and if you're going to ask me where this marker is, I wanted to say it's around Woodville, but I'm not entirely sure. But he was a Catholic priest that came here, and he's got an interesting story. Because one, he gave last rites to 2 men accused of murder. 2, he wrote about being in here, and he said he had to leave Lower Sandusky and he went to Tiffin because it just wasn't a healthy place to live, Lower Sandusky. So he goes out to Denver, Colorado, and he's in charge of this church. They have one church and 35 saloons in Denver, and a woman named Willa Cather writes a book called Death of an Archbishop, and that's him. So he's a pretty big deal, and the reason he's here, the turnpike or the toll roads, is that when the Irish were building this toll road, this pathway, they asked him to come out and give ceremonies for christening, marriages, just a church service is what they wanted. So, and he's got an interesting story by himself. There's your corduroy roads, Route 20 and Route 25. And like I said, if you got off, and I have a picture here, you get off this road, there's a picture of a horse that's buried up to its neck. And the only thing it's showing is its nose. And there's also a cute story where there's a hat laying out there. A guy walks over and he picks up the hat. Somebody says, "Hey!" And he starts to rise out of the hat. He says, "That's my hat." And when he gets all the way out, he's sitting on a horse. Did that happen? Probably not. It's a good story. Corduroy roads, and then plank roads. This, I don't know if you can imagine being on the car because those things swayed. They weren't near as sturdy, but they did them around on Route 25 more so than here. I've been on a corduroy road once in my life when I was about 20 years old up in Wolverine, Michigan, I think, and I lost my muffler. It was rough. So here's all your toll houses, and if you're interested, I do have a list of every single tavern and the name that goes with it. Christy asked me if I needed copies, and I thought, no, I don't really need copies. But I have the names, and you might be related to some of them, who knows. But there's all the turnpike, the tolls. It really changed when we came back from New York. We're on a toll road, but they're doing it from above. So we had to pay the toll about 2 months after the trip. It just freaked me out. They said, "We're on a toll road. Where are the toll booths?" Dang, I just can't handle it. So toll houses, 2-story single roof frame buildings with kitchen attached. So a lot of times people actually lived in a toll booth house. That's how they made a little extra cash. And we know this from an insurance policy, and I don't know where I ran into that from. Probably mad at my own insurance company. So this is at the Woodville Library. Right next to it, it's connected to the historical. And you can see all this stuff. He was a Civil War veteran. He was at the junction of US 20 and State Route 51, where there is still a original tavern there. Somebody lived in that building, still there. And people used to pay to go up in this tower, but people would come down and say, "Don't bother paying because all you can see is trees. There's nothing to see but trees." So what did you have to do? The journal talks about non-payment of tolls in some unusual cases, such as fines assessed for the act of swearing in front of ladies. Wow. Be in trouble. Oh yeah. I was watching Ted Lasso, and that's all this one guy says is he's made his career on saying the F word. He's really good at it. But kind of like George Carlin talked about in different ways. I'm showing my age here. I know you can't see that, but this is the toll book that's there, and in it, in meticulous handwriting, very beautiful handwriting, is all the tolls. You got tolls for the size of the rig, the carriage, the coach, or wagon, number of horses or mules, size of load, and the size of the wheel rim. And also some of the trial cases that were taking place in Woodville. So, rates of toll. Now, road rage. 2 guys coming from opposite directions. One is going to have to get off because they're not rated high. So they have to move off, unload everything, let the other one pass, reload it, and go on their way. I go up Buckland, I get so mad at people turning on 3rd in front of me and then turning on silent. Anybody with me? Drives me crazy. And I'm not saying I'm the world's greatest driver, but come on. Come on, man. And you can see here, chariot coach, chase with 1 horse, horse and rider, or a lead horse. I mean, they got everything. For every other carriage, Pleasant under, meticulous, and this is on the side of the road, and that's what they looked at and said, okay, I gotta unload. 4 days to get to Lindsay. And then when you got there, you're in the middle of Black Swamp, because it's pretty bad. Further west you go, Lindsay's in the midst of it. And basically people just made a little hut. Sometimes they had a cloth over the opening, there was no door, and they'd wake up in the morning and the Indians would be sleeping on the floor with them. They just came in, not to say that there weren't trouble with Indians, because there was, but they'd wake up in the morning sometime and the Indians would be out maybe cooking, by the fire, that kind of stuff. Sometimes it'd take a whole day to get out of the mud. The white man came and took possession of the Black Swamp before the Creator was ready. That's a pretty cool quote about what it was like. Also, when people are going through the swamp there, they would come down Lake Erie, and there's a story about a woman who falls overboard, and she's got a bucket, holding on to a bucket. She dies, and the guy who's in charge of the ship says, "But did you save the bucket?" A guy named Jim Mollenkopf wrote about 4 really good books about the Black Swamp, about what it was like to live here. House rules: 4 pence a night for a bed, 1 pence for sleeping on the floor, 6 pence for supper, 2 pence for stabling a horse, no spirits allowed in bedroom. I guess everywhere else was okay. No more than 5 persons to sleep in one bed. Wow. No tobacco juice to be spit on the floor, no dogs allowed upstairs, no peddlers or tinkers allowed. Don't say anything about lice or stink. Now my dad was a family of 9. He slept 4 to a bed with his brothers. I don't think much sleeping got done, because they slept diagonally across the bed and fought all the time. I can't imagine the smell. Soldier mud holes. You could make hundreds of dollars with a mud hole. And like I said, some would go out in the middle of the night, keep pouring water in it, so the guy gets stuck over and over. Charge customers food and drink, place to lay their head. Also charge people for pulling their wagon and horses or team out of the mud. There's a picture of a horse. Good luck getting that out. One mud hole owner, tired of the holy business, sold his interest to a neighbor for $5, hoping by this means to escape retribution in the next world and the curses of the immigrants in the present. This guy was not a nice man. He lived right next to the Moors, and you wanted to go to the Moors' house. This is over on 51 and 20. If you went to Craig's, you're going to be abused. He's going to overcharge you. The Moors a lot of times didn't even charge people for staying. I don't know what the conditions were like, but this guy got every cent out of the people that he could. And J.P. Moore, that's the carriage place was at the Garrison. By all accounts, very good guy. Built the carriage house, one of the largest in Sandusky County. Also owned a house at 20 and 51, like it says. Stayed the night without charge. As a result, the big cabin was filled every night. I can't begin to tell you what it smelled like in there. You know, we talk about, okay, they're staying at these taverns, they're nice, and they're not all nice. There's some very nice ones that I'll show you, but I'm not sure about the Moors. I'm sure they did the best they could. The hat over here is a story about the guy that finds the hat, pulls on it, and the horse comes up. And you see the horse over here to the right. The money indicates the $100 that a man spent in one night just to get unstuck, or 3 days he spent $100. And that is a picture of a tavern nowhere in this area, but just to give you some idea what taverns look like in that particular time. Hessville. Now remember I told you that people would sit at Hessville and watch this caravan go continuous, never stopping, time after time. Hessville at one time was called Cash Town because the guy there kept his cash in a barrel, which I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do, but a man named Daniel Hess eventually moved there. It will be named after him, and also the original barn where they made the carousels for Cedar Point is still there. So there was a guy in town that made carousel horses 4-seated point. But you can see 20 feet banks of muck, 3 feet high, building campfires and sleeping in wagons. You had broken stone later on, toll gate every 25 miles, or 8 miles, and 25 cents for the one in Hesper. Now, name card used to be the archivist at the Hayes Center, Presidential Center. This information comes from her. She's got some, if you look up a high of yesterday's, you're looking for something to do, she's got hundreds of stories, local history stories, about a page long, that are very fascinating. This is where this came from, the Rose Tavern. $104 for the purchase. It was covered like in a jungle road. The cabin was 26 by 40 feet, contained 2 rooms. It became part of the Wagner family, and if you want to see it, it's up in Lime Village. Moved there in 1981, so you get some kind of idea of what the tavern might have looked like. It's not the train, it's this. The Seeger Tavern, 101, boarding the south side of the Pike, Woodville Township, 118 acres. 125 an acre and 4 annual payments. And this is across from Sugar Creek Cemetery. And I'll show you a picture. Later became McBride Tavern. Now Seeger and Miller, again, these are connected through marriage. One of them died and the wife takes it over. It was kind of a lucrative business. There's all kinds of stories though. There's a one guy, what was his name? His name was Permit Jones. And they found him buried in the muck. He was drunk, and then they trying to accuse the guy running over in his carriage and so on and so forth. Nothing really came. But Permit Thomas was his name. But he's so drunk he just like fell in the mud and died. And here we're getting to the McBride Tavern. And Michael came from Pennsylvania. I'm trying to cut through some of this stuff. Now, that's the McBride Tavern. It was there till about 1971, and they widened Route 20. I don't know why they tore it down, because it's way off the road. There used to be a barn there, and quite honestly, I don't know if it's still there. This picture is probably taken about 8 years ago. And then across the street is the Sugar Creek Cemetery. So when you're Sugar Creek Cemetery and you look south, you can see where the McBride Tavern. And that's one of the more well-known taverns of the time period. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. Route 20. Right before you get to Woodville. This is the Howard Tavern. And this is a good story. This is the place where the people were laying on the floor and the lice and stuff were coming on. And my friend and I went and knocked on the door here. And there was a dog in there as big as a house. When it jumped on the door, the whole house shook. I'm not exaggerating, because I love dogs. This was, she said, "Would you like to come in?" And I said, "No." "Would you like to come out?" So she came out, and she was embarrassed to show us, because we couldn't see it at this point. That's pretty clear. It's been cleared away since we've been there. She said, "Oh, it's just such a mess, but you're welcome." So we talked to her, and she's a leather worker. And I said, "Well, Howard was also a leather worker in the 1830s. And she said, "Oh, that just made me get goosebumps." And I said, "Well, it's kind of weird." But Howard made all the bullets for the county, for the area. So people wanted bullets, they would go to Howard. And also if they wanted deer meat, they would go to Howard. The barn is still there, because these deer carcasses would be hanging up inside the barn. And he would pay kids to go on the ridge roads, the ridge lines, and chase the deer, and then Howard would shoot them. So if you're heading towards, of course, I think it's before Woodville on the right-hand side of the road. Now this is probably one of the classiest of the taverns. You'll recognize it, I'm sure, if you go down Route 20. It was a favorite stopping point for theatrical companies. Had 28 rooms. It also had a ballroom where you dance and the floor would move. Not because it was going to fall apart, but that's the way it was built. And the ballroom took up the entire east side of the second floor. The floor rose and fell as the dancers passed over it. And there's a story there's some argument between a guy and a girl, and evidently the girl's hot because in what story is not the girl hot, right? And there's a shooting and somebody dies. And it's all covered in mystery, and I have no idea what actually happened. You recognize that?
Yeah.
Yep, that still pretty much looks like it does. Looks like that today. So that was one of the best places to stop on the Pike. Yep, Stony Ridge. So this is into Perrysburg. So now we're coming into Front Street on Perrysburg. I think I have the 140 West Front Street. There used to be a huge bell here. The Indians liked to ring the bell. Eventually they stole the bell. So they chased after the Indians all the way to Upper Sandusky, and they brought the bell back, and it's now in the library in Perrysburg. And that's the turnpike.
Woo.
Do you have questions?